Hi, BookTube. It's Roz, and it's the end of August, 31st of August, when I'm recording this. I may not put it up for a few days, we'll see. But August is Women in Translation Month, and jokingly I say that every month is Women in Translation Month as far as I'm concerned, but I couldn't possibly let it pass without kind of marking it. And I have read 4 books this month by women in translation that I will mention. In the order that I've read them: Gilgi, One of Us by Irmgard Keun, The Cost of Sugar, that's a German book, The Cost of Sugar by Cynthia MacLeod, who, despite her name, is very much a Surinamese author, and which was translated from the Dutch. Art by Yasmin Reza, who's a French playwright, and Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. So that was originally written in Spanish. She's Mexican. I'm also going to talk about a 5th book, which is not a work in translation, although it is by a woman. It's Invisible Women by Caroline Criado-Perez, and I will explain why I felt that interconnected with Women in Translation Month for me. So, Criado-Perez, Invisible Women, it's a non-fiction book which you may be familiar with, and if you've read it, I'll be really interested to hear your kind of thoughts and reactions to it. But what she sets out to do in that book is to look at, I suppose, women and data, and how women have or are invisible in often in the data that we collect or have about our lives, our world, and the effect that that has. So the classic example that she uses is crash test dummies, and the way that the dummies that are used to test the safety of cars, and that they are all crash test dummies historically were the size of a sort of an average man, and the impact that that has on the safety of vehicles for women. And then when they have made a female crash test dummy in theory, or one to represent women, it's actually just like a scaled down version of the male one. And then they only really regularly use it to test in the passenger seat because statistically women are passengers more often than they're drivers, but what that means is that if you're a woman driver and you're in a crash, you're more likely to die. So she's absolutely, she goes through a whole succession of different areas of life really and identifies that. But what is, I suppose, the extra layer that I found, like, we know about uh, the patriarchy, misogyny, disadvantage of women. We know about all that. That the sort of explicit or deliberate side we're aware of. But the other layer that she brings out, which I found really interesting, was the way now as a society, certainly there's a world economy and so on, we're very driven by data, by algorithms and so on, and they might be seen as neutral. But if the data that you have collected is always shaped around men, and assumption that somehow men are like the default version of humanity and women are the alternate or aberrant or one, then when you use an apparently neutral sort of set of data, or it actually perpetuates gender imbalance. Now, how does this interconnect in my mind with Women in Translation Month? Well, Women in Translation Month was started by, now I need to get this woman's name right, Maytal Kadinsky, is Israeli blogger, but who blogs in English about books. And she started it in 2014 because she was aware of some of the data around publishing of works by women written in languages other than English, originally written in languages other than English, okay? And The what yes, it's kind of like, why do we need Women in Translation Month? So if you look at the uh, English language book market, okay, and you look at how much of that is books in translation, in terms of sort of literary publications, okay, 3.5%, which is shameful in itself. But if you then add to that only 30% of that 30% of that 3.5% is translated works by women, um, then you realise why she wanted to start Women in Translation Month and why it is so important. And it's you have to feel that, and Criado-Perez, this isn't one of the areas that she sort of digs deep into, but that essentially the gender imbalance in the publishing industry is a key factor in why that is the case. So lots of possibly, and it's these things are hard to kind of calculate, aren't they? But women probably read more than men, more fiction certainly, than men. So you would think it would be logical that women would be powerful in the publishing industry of fiction, and that books by women would be more likely to be published, and that if you were translating fiction, you'd translate more by women. So why not? Why not? Well, the truth is that the publishing industry is still dominated by men, and you see this just in so many layers. So, like, if you look at what publishing houses choose to submit for prizes, more men. If you look at book reviews, numbers of books reviewed, more by men. If you well, it's shifting a bit. If you look at the bestseller lists now, and you see like women, sometimes dominating the bestseller list, but that doesn't filter through to necessarily more women being commissioned, or more of their work being published. It's interesting that and it's always, once you get into the kind of data, it's fascinating, isn't it? If you look at male writers and women writers, and when they're asked to recommend books by other writers, men recommend books by other men almost exclusively, not totally, but hugely disproportionately. Another brilliant statistic for you, brilliant as in revealing rather than happy, is that if you look at the character balance, character space in novels, okay, books by men will have around a quarter to a third of the character space taken by women, if that makes sense, and whereas books by women, it will be around 50-50. See, all this just really reminds you why we really need um, initiatives like Women in Translation Month, even though, I know we had the, Booker International list this year, and it's sort of dominated by women. Everyone says, oh, we don't need, to worry about this anymore, because look at all these books by women getting attention. Or you see, Women's Prize for Fiction was set up because of all seeing like all male shortlists for the Booker Prize, and now we've had many more women winners. There's a sort of more reasonable sort of mutual representation. So people say, "Oh, why do we need a Women's Prize for Fiction anymore?" But we still do. Um, and one of the interesting things, revealing things that Caroline Criado-Perez brings out in her in Invisible Women is, how did they change the number of women instrumentalists in big name orchestras in like the States or the UK or whatever, because there was disproportionately, although lots and lots of women at music colleges, that didn't then filter through to women getting seats in major orchestras. So they went to a system of when they went to a system of blind auditioning, where the people listening couldn't see who was playing, just like magic, the gender imbalance disappears. Yeah, they just started taking, you know, similar or greater numbers of women than male musicians. Interestingly, when you do the same with publishing, if you if publishers do a blind judging, sorry, is that bad language to use? I'm sorry. Yeah, if they don't know the identity and the gender of the author of the books that they are reading to select whether or not they will publish them or not. Again, the unbalance mismatch that means more men are selected for publication disappears. Yeah, so that is the social and political context for Women in Translation Month. Yeah. Do comment your thoughts about it. Yeah. So let's go to the books. Enough politics for now. And two of these books I've talked about in other places. So Art, the play by Yasmin Reza, I read alongside Tilly, and we did one of our discussing drama videos about that. So I won't say anything more about that here. One of the others, The Cost of Sugar, the book from Suriname, I've done like a scallywandling video about that, where I talk about books from sort of, places where I'm perhaps reading a book that I haven't read a book by an author from that place before. Yeah, that makes sense. And so I will leave those and talk about the other two, which is Gilgi. I'm not sure it's Gilgi or Gilgi. I ought to know. I ought to have checked. I'm not sure. Some German-speaking person watching this, please tell me. I did look up Irmgard Keun to get the pronunciation of her name right, but I don't think to do it for the character. But that and Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, I think, were probably my two top books of the month. The my other possible top book was the book that I read for Faulkner in August, and it's a bit of an unfair comparison, that, because that was a kind of a real in-depth read along. So, but putting that on one side, yeah, two 5-star reads of for me, knockout books. So why? Well, so Gilgi was first published in 1931. And Irmgard Keun is German. She was born in Berlin, then moved to Cologne. She came to my attention because of Mel and Britta's initiative, the Read German Books in 2020 project that they're pursuing, and thank you to them. That's how I heard about Keun, because she was a writer that I can't believe she completely had passed me by up to now, which is strange because she's absolutely the sort of writer I really like, in that she's from a kind of a period, the sort of 20s and 30s and 40s, where women's writing that I find really interesting, and she writes about women insightfully, deeply, and passionately and frankly about women's emotions. And she was so in Weimar Germany there was a sort of a concept of the new woman, and Gilgi is the new woman, as it were, in that she is rejecting a sort of a German Hausfrau, version of what women's life should be, and she's ambitious and she wants to have a career, and she wants to have a sex life of her choosing, and obviously this was a version of womanhood which then would be unacceptable in Germany as the Nazis came to power. And actually Keun, her books were banned. Her first couple of books that she'd written, they were banned in sort of mid-30s. She had to leave Germany. She tried to sue the Nazis, the Nazi party, for ruining her career, which is brilliant. So interesting woman, sadly became an alcoholic, but didn't die till 1982. So, but yeah, as a book, it's very. So you're reading a book from 1931, translated, obviously, a kind of quite a modern, recent translation by Geoff Wilkes, excellent translation, but it's a book that reads as incredibly fresh into 2020, although it was written in 1931. It's provocative, almost. You can see how it would have been at the time. I mean, as a sort of, there's nothing. It reflects its time, but it's timeless in a way. In thinking about female psyche, I guess. The main character is ultimately kind of derailed by love and pregnancy, but not defeated, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would really, really strongly recommend this as a book to read. Yeah, very much so. And thank you, Britta and Mel, for making me discover it. The other book that I'm going to talk about is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, and that, bang up to date. It's was one of the shortlist for the 2020 International Booker Prize. Didn't win, sadly. Although I haven't yet read the book that did win, so I may read that and think, oh, it's even better. But and interestingly, Fernanda Melchor was born the year that Irmgard Keun died, 1982. So yeah, bang up to date. Now, Hurricane Season has divided its readers, and I'll be interested in the comments to hear so if you've read it, kind of which side of the divide you fall on. Okay, because I know some people who have really been turned off by the kind of brutality of this book, and I know one booktuber, Mark Nash, he read it and he said, I may get this slightly wrong, but basically he said it was a book that was all written all on one note, and that one note was shrill. So that's a pretty devastating criticism of a book, isn't it? I just didn't feel that. It is a book that is in a sense on one note, but for me that one note was rage, fury, outrage, and as a woman I could identify with that outrage that Fernanda Melchor brings to this book. She says she had thought about writing non-fiction about it's basically about Veracruz, the town, her town in Mexico, and the outrage that she wants to write about is femicide, but also homophobia and just kind of poverty and the impact of poverty on people's lives, particularly on relationships between people, and sort of misogyny. Yeah, she realised she couldn't write that book because it's actually too dangerous, really. If you bear in mind the sort of role of drug cartels and in that area and so on. So instead, she expresses that through fiction, and it's stylistically a very interesting book. It's basically 8 paragraphs, but each of those paragraphs is like a whole chapter of the book. Well, one's quite short, one's they're varying lengths, but and they're not first person stream of consciousness, but they are that kind of you are in 8 different people's worlds, minds, and it's kind of like about a crime, the murder of the witch, as she's known, or he, as we later find out. And this is like different, almost testimonies of people who know something about that crime or were in some way involved in that crime. And you gradually find out more through their different, the 8 different characters. And that builds a picture of a community. And the stresses and strains operating on that community. I found it a compulsive read, and a very humane book, and a great one for Women in Translation Month, because it gave it like it's like it's a voice from a contemporary woman in Mexico talking about what it means to live where she lives, her hometown. And we would only hear that voice if that voice gets translated. Otherwise it's limited to the Spanish-speaking world, and it's a voice that should be heard in multiple different languages. Yeah. So that was my Women in Translation Month, and very satisfying one it was too. Tell me about yours, was what I meant to say before I cut off. Yeah, tell me about yours and recommend things that I should read anytime, but particularly next August.